Mention the name Archimedes, and the image of a genius springs to mind. Someone who grasped the laws of the universe long before the dawn of modern science. His name has become synonymous with the triumph of human intellect over the seemingly impossible. But who was this legendary figure whose discoveries have endured for millennia? Archimedes was born around 287 BC in Syracuse, a Greek city-state on the island of Sicily. At that time, Syracuse was a thriving hub of culture and science, a crossroads for the great ideas of the Hellenic world. Life in the city was marked by contrasts. On one hand, it was a wealthy trading port, bustling with philosophical debates and artistic creation. On the other, its strategic location made it a frequent target of attacks and warfare. It's likely this duality, this blend of refinement and peril, that shaped Archimedes' unique worldview, one where theory was inextricably linked to practice. Archimedes lived in an era when science was just beginning to probe the fundamental principles of the universe. Before him, philosophers like Plato and Aristotle had pondered the natural world, but they rarely backed up their ideas with concrete calculations or experiments. Archimedes, however, was different. He didn't just observe. He acted, created, tested, and applied his discoveries practically. Therein lay his uniqueness. He was not only a thinker and scholar, but also an engineer capable of bringing his ideas to life. Syracuse, Archimedes' hometown, played a crucial role in his development. The city was under the rule of King Hero II, a patron of science and the arts. Archimedes often worked under his aegis, tackling not only theoretical puzzles, but also problems of practical importance to the city. Recognizing Archimedes' talent, Hieros II entrusted him with complex tasks, ranging from designing defensive fortifications to verifying the honesty of a goldsmith, a story that would later form the basis of the Eureka legend, which we'll revisit. For his time, Archimedes was a man of the future. His writings are not merely dry calculations, but works filled with a passion for exploration. He wrote about numbers, formulas, and physical principles, laying the groundwork for future generations of scientists. Archimedes understood that science wasn't just about abstract ideas. It was a tool capable of changing the world. His figure serves as a bridge between ancient philosophy and modern science. He established principles that, centuries later, would be used by Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton. Looking at Archimedes' achievements, it's hard not to wonder how a man living over 2,000 years ago could attain such a profound understanding of how the world works. Perhaps it stemmed from his extraordinary curiosity and his desire to explain even the most complex phenomena. For Archimedes, the word impossible didn't seem to exist. There was only a problem waiting for a solution. Archimedes was someone capable of turning a simple idea into something monumental. We've already gathered that he thought on a grand scale, but one phrase perhaps best captures his approach to science and life. "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the earth." This legendary quote isn't just rhetoric, it's a true manifesto of his genius. At first glance, it sounds incredible, even audacious, but Archimedes knew what he was talking about. He was referring to the lever, a simple device that, with the right fulcrum, can move objects far exceeding a person's own weight. Extend the lever arm and find a solid base, and its potential becomes almost limitless. This was Archimedes in essence. He looked at the laws of physics and saw not limitations, but possibilities. But this phrase isn't just about mechanics. It speaks to Archimedes' mindset. He believed that every problem had a solution. One only needed to find that crucial place to stand, the key to the problem. His ability to find answers to complex questions inspired people not only in his own time, but for centuries after. Archimedes showed that knowledge is power, capable of reshaping the world, and his lever became a symbol not just of a physical discovery, but of a philosophy. If you have the right tool and a firm foundation, you are capable of anything. Life in Syracuse was vibrant. Narrow streets lined with modest houses adorned with pottery hummed with the clamor of crowds. Ships from across the Mediterranean docked in the harbor, bringing goods. Here, one could encounter merchants from Egypt, sailors from Crete, artisans from Carthage. People from different corners of the world exchanged not only goods, but also knowledge. These bustling scenes of commerce and interaction likely captivated Archimedes from childhood, nurturing his curiosity and passion for understanding how the world worked. However, Syracuse wasn't just about trade and luxury. The city occupied a strategically vital position, making it a frequent target for attacks. This forced its inhabitants to pay close attention to defense. The best engineers labored over mighty fortress walls and war machines. One can only imagine a young Archimedes standing near the city wall, watching craftsmen who seemed to turn stone and wood into marvels of engineering. Perhaps it was then that the first images of the mechanisms that would later bring him fame began to form in his mind. Syracuse was not only a place where machines were built for defense, but also a thriving intellectual center. At that time, philosophy and science in Greece had reached incredible heights. Just a few decades before Archimedes' birth, Euclid had written his Elements, one of the most influential works in the history of mathematics. These works had already spread throughout the Greek world and become foundational for education. Discussions about the nature of things, the movement of stars, and the structure of the universe were constantly taking place. Archimedes grew up amidst ideas that inspired great discoveries. Greek science at the time was closely tied to practice. Mathematics, for example, was used to design complex architectural structures and plan siege engines. In such an environment, it was impossible to remain aloof. From an early age, Archimedes could see how the ideas of philosophers and scientists were translated into reality. Perhaps this is why, from the outset, he didn't separate theory from practice, but viewed them as parts of a whole. Life in Syracuse combined everything: bustling daily activity, intellectual sophistication, and the constant challenge of survival. For a child with Archimedes' sharp mind and curiosity, it was the perfect environment for development. He could observe merchants calculating profits, engineers creating water supply systems, and philosophers debating the composition of the world. All this laid the foundation for the future genius who would one day change the course of history. One can picture the young Archimedes, inspired by the world around him, beginning to ask questions. Why do ships float? How do those giant catapults being built in the city square work? What are the scholars doing with those strange circles and lines they draw in the sand? These very questions marked the beginning of his great journey, one on which he would reveal to the world laws previously unimagined. After his childhood in Syracuse, Archimedes traveled to Alexandria, the preeminent scientific and cultural center of the age. Founded by Alexander the Great and developed by the Ptolemaic dynasty, this city became a magnet for the finest minds of the Hellenistic world. Alexandria was unique in its concentration of knowledge and technology from diverse cultures: Egyptian, Greek, Persian, and even Indian. For the young Archimedes, it was an opportunity not only to study the works of past great thinkers, but also to exchange ideas with leading contemporary scholars. Alexandria was famed for its library, rightly considered the largest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. Its collection held thousands of scrolls and manuscripts, covering subjects from philosophy and mathematics to medicine and astronomy. It was a place where the knowledge of different civilizations was gathered, systematized, and expanded upon. Upon arriving, Archimedes gained access to works that shaped his worldview and laid the foundation for his future discoveries. But the library was only part of Alexandria's scholarly infrastructure. The city housed the mathematician, a kind of research institute and academy where scholars studied nature, conducted experiments, and debated ideas. Within the walls of the mathematician, conversations and arguments spurred new discoveries. The best minds of the era converged here, and Archimedes had the chance to learn from the finest. A key moment in his education was encountering the works of Euclid, whose Elements had already achieved the status of the primary textbook on geometry. Archimedes delved deeply into this treatise, which systematized knowledge about lines, planes, figures, and their properties. This knowledge didn't just solidify his interest in mathematics, it became the launching point for his future research in geometry and mechanics. Archimedes viewed Euclid's ideas not as final answers, but as a challenge to be developed and expanded. Furthermore, Archimedes encountered the works of other scholars engaged in mechanics and physics. For instance, Ctesibius, one of the earliest inventors of hydraulic devices, worked on creating water clocks and pumps. His work might have inspired Archimedes' investigations into hydrostatics, which would later lead to the discovery of the famous Archimedes principle. Astronomical ideas were also discussed in Alexandria, likely sparking Archimedes' interest in studying celestial bodies and planetary motion. Studying in Alexandria allowed Archimedes to cultivate his talents, but it also gave him access to discussions with people tackling ambitious problems. These weren't just theorists, They were individuals addressing concrete challenges, defending cities, improving agriculture, creating new technologies. Archimedes adopted this practical approach, which would become a vital part of his scientific endeavors. Returning from Alexandria, Archimedes was no longer the curious youth who had left Syracuse. He came back armed with profound knowledge of mathematics, physics, and engineering, enabling him to embark on his independent research. Alexandria was the crucible where his talent found direction and his thoughts took concrete form. Upon returning from Alexandria, Archimedes actively pursued mathematical and geometrical research. One of his greatest discoveries was the spiral now named after him, the Archimedes spiral. It was one of the first complex curves described mathematically, and its properties have inspired scientists for centuries. To understand the Archimedes spiral, imagine drawing a line starting from a central point, gradually winding around it like a coil. Crucially, the distance between each successive turn remains constant. This means that as the spiral grows, each new loop is equidistant from the previous one. The Archimedes spiral wasn't just a geometric curiosity. It was a genuine tool for solving complex problems. Archimedes used it to study and calculate the areas enclosed between the spiral's turns. In his time, this was a formidable task, as modern methods like integral calculus didn't exist. Archimedes developed his own ingenious techniques to find such areas, and his work in this direction laid the groundwork for future mathematical investigations. The practical significance of the Archimedes spiral proved substantial. Its properties began to be applied in engineering and mechanics. For instance, spiral pumps designed to lift water were inspired by this shape. Similar pumps were used even in antiquity, and their operating principle may well have been influenced by Archimedes' ideas. The spiral is also utilized in mechanisms requiring uniform motion, such as in gear transmissions or screw-based designs. Even today, the principles underlying the study of this curve find applications in various fields of technology. Archimedes made significant contributions to mathematics by developing methods for calculating the areas and volumes of complex shapes, techniques that anticipated the development of integral calculus. To solve such problems, he employed the method of exhaustion. This involved dividing a figure into a multitude of smaller parts, with known parameters, and then summing their areas or volumes. To calculate the area of a circle, Archimedes inscribed regular polygons within it and circumscribed polygons around it. By increasing the number of sides of these polygons, he achieved increasingly accurate approximations of the circle's area. Ultimately, he proved that the area of a circle is equal to the product of its radius and half its circumference. Archimedes also worked on calculating the volumes of three-dimensional figures. He demonstrated that the volume of a sphere is 2/3 the volume of the cylinder that circumscribes it, assuming the cylinder's height equals its diameter. To do this, he conceptually sliced the figures into thin sections and compared their volumes. Archimedes considered this discovery one of the most important of his life, and requested that an image of a sphere and cylinder be inscribed on his tombstone. One of the most famous stories associated with Archimedes concerns the crown of King Hiroseku. Hiro, ruler of Syracuse and Archimedes' patron, commissioned a goldsmith to craft a golden crown shaped like a laurel wreath. The goldsmith received a specific amount of gold for the task, but upon completion, the king suspected the artisan might have adulterated the gold with a cheaper metal, like silver. However, he didn't want to damage the intricate crown to test its purity. So, Hiro presented Archimedes with the challenge: determine if the crown was indeed pure gold without destroying it. Grasping the solution, Archimedes supposedly leaped out of the bath, shouted, "Eureka!" Greek for "I have found it," and ran through the city streets, having forgotten even to dress. While this part of the story is likely embellished, it highlights the sheer joy of discovery and the significance of the insight itself. Archimedes applied his newfound principle to test the crown. He first weighed it in the air, then submerged it in water and weighed it again. Measuring the difference allowed him to calculate the crown's density and compare it to the density of pure gold. He concluded that the crown indeed contained impurities, as its density was lower than that of gold. This story marks the genesis of the law of hydrostatics, known today as Archimedes' principle. It states that a body immersed in a fluid experiences an upward buoyant force equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. The legend of the crown and the cry of "Eureka" have become enduring symbols of scientific discovery, where observation and intuition led to an elegant solution for a practical problem. This moment illustrates how simple observations from everyday life can lead to fundamental breakthroughs. Archimedes' principle explains why some objects float while others sink. Its essence lies in the buoyant force exerted on a body submerged in a fluid, which equals the weight of the fluid displaced by the body. To understand this simply, imagine placing an object, say a ball, into water. As the ball goes in, it pushes some water out of the way, causing the water level to rise. This displaced water exerts an upward pressure on the ball, trying to push it back to the surface. This is the buoyant force. What happens next depends on the object's weight and volume. If the object's weight is greater than the buoyant force, it sinks like a stone. It's heavy, and the volume of water it displaces isn't enough to support it. However, if the object's weight is less than or equal to the buoyant force, it floats like a wooden plank, which displaces enough water for the buoyant force to keep it on the surface. An everyday example: when a person gets into a bathtub, their body displaces water, and the water level rises. They feel lighter because the water exerts a buoyant force that partially counteracts their weight. This principle underpins many phenomena and technologies. It explains why ships, despite their immense weight, don't sink. Their shape allows them to displace a large enough volume of water so that the buoyant force balances their weight. Similarly, for hot air balloons or blimps filled with helium, the lighter gas inside displaces the surrounding air, and the buoyant force makes the balloon rise. Thus, Archimedes' principle is a key concept that helps us understand how bodies interact with fluids, liquids, and gases. This discovery profoundly impacted the development of engineering, shipbuilding, and many other scientific and technical fields. Having established the principles of hydrostatics, explaining the behavior of bodies and fluids, Archimedes turned his focus to mechanics. His next major contribution involved levers and pulleys, simple machines that could dramatically reduce the effort needed for heavy tasks. Archimedes discovered how a lever could multiply an applied force manifold. He observed that by correctly positioning the fulcrum and choosing the lever arm lengths, a small effort on one end could lift or move a load many times heavier. This discovery led to his famous declaration, "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the earth." This idea illustrates why the lever is a cornerstone of mechanics. Archimedes demonstrated vividly how significant results could be achieved with minimal effort, making his research particularly valuable for practical applications. Building on his knowledge of levers, Archimedes developed a system of pulleys known as a compound pulley, or polyspast. This system consisted of fixed and movable pulleys threaded with a rope. A polyspast significantly reduced the force required to lift heavy loads. The more pulleys used, the easier it became to handle the weight. Such mechanisms proved indispensable for construction and transportation. Archimedes applied his discoveries practically. His levers and pulleys were used in erecting buildings, moving heavy stone blocks, and creating siege engines. Thanks to these mechanisms, construction work became more efficient. Archimedes' research into levers and pulleys not only explained fundamental mechanical principles, but also demonstrated how scientific knowledge could simplify practical challenges. His discoveries formed the basis for many technologies still in use today, from simple hand tools to complex hoisting machinery. Archimedes gained renown not only for his scientific breakthroughs, but also as an outstanding inventor who created sophisticated devices that helped defend Syracuse during the Roman siege of the city from 214 to 212 BC. His engineering inventions played a crucial role in the defense. Among Archimedes' most significant achievements were his catapults and ballistae. He designed improved mechanisms for hurling stones, arrows, and other projectiles over long distances. Archimedes precisely calculated the dimensions and angles of these devices to enhance their accuracy and range. Thanks to these engines, the city's defenders could bombard Roman ships and siege works long before the enemy reached the walls. Another invention mentioned in ancient sources is the device known as the claw of Archimedes. It was essentially a large crane equipped with a grappling hook or pincer, used to lift the prows of Roman ships as they approached the city walls. The ships were hoisted out of the water and then forcefully dropped back down, causing severe damage or capsizing them. The Romans witnessing this device were reportedly terrified by its destructive power. The most legendary story involves the use of so-called burning mirrors or heat rays. It is said that Archimedes designed a system of polished metal mirrors that reflected and focused sunlight onto Roman ships. The concentrated light could allegedly ignite the wooden parts of the vessels, turning them into blazing targets. Although the historical reality of this device is debated by modern historians, the very idea of such an invention showcases the scale of Archimedes' engineering thinking. Furthermore, Archimedes improved the city's defensive walls by designing mechanisms to drop stones, logs, or other heavy objects onto attackers, hindering the advance of siege towers or smashing enemy structures. His devices operated on the principles of levers and pulleys, making them simple yet effective. The defense of Syracuse, bolstered by Archimedes' inventions, lasted for over 2 years. His machines not only slowed the Roman advance, but also struck terror into the invaders, who struggled to comprehend how they worked. Although Syracuse eventually fell, Archimedes' contribution to the city's defense became legendary. Following the inventions that helped defend Syracuse, Archimedes focused on creating devices to solve practical problems in everyday life. One such invention was the famous Archimedes screw, designed for lifting water. This device proved so effective that its principles are still applied today. The Archimedes screw consists of a helix, spiral blade, encased within an inclined cylinder or tube. One end of the device is submerged in water, while the other is elevated at an angle. As the screw is rotated, water is trapped between the turns of the helix and is lifted up along the tube. The device works by creating a continuous upward movement of water along the spiral path. This simple mechanism proved extremely useful in agriculture, construction, and other fields. In antiquity, the Archimedes screw was used for irrigating fields, especially in regions with limited water access. For example, in Egypt, it was employed to lift water from the Nile onto farmland. It was also used for draining swamps and filling urban water systems. Furthermore, the screw became indispensable on ships, helping to quickly remove water from bilges and prevent sinking. Modern technology hasn't lost interest in the principles embedded in this invention. Today, the Archimedes screw is used in sewage treatment plants to lift wastewater, in agriculture for irrigation, and even in hydropower generation, where it operates in reverse. Falling water turns the screw, and its motion is converted into electricity. The device has also been adapted for transporting granular materials like grain or sand in industrial settings. Its simplicity and reliability make it relevant even in the 21st century. The Roman general Marcellus, who admired Archimedes as one of the great minds of his time, reportedly gave orders to spare his life. However, in the chaos of the city's capture, this command went unheeded. According to legend, Archimedes was engrossed in his calculations, drawing geometric figures in the sand or on a tablet, when a Roman soldier entered his home. The scholar, completely absorbed in his work, paid no attention to the soldier's presence, and merely uttered words to the effect of, "Do not disturb my circles." Perhaps irritated or simply unaware of whom he was dealing with, the soldier killed Archimedes on the spot. This tragic episode highlights Archimedes' profound dedication to science. Even facing mortal danger, his mind remained immersed in contemplation and the study of nature's laws. For Archimedes, nothing seemed more important than his research, even amidst surrounding chaos. However, the story also underscores the conflict between knowledge and force. Marcellus, a man who understood the value of science, tried to save Archimedes, but his order couldn't stop the soldier's violence and ignorance. The scientist's death became a symbol of the vulnerability of knowledge in the face of brute force. Archimedes' death was an immense loss to the scientific world. His works inspired generations of scholars, and his name became synonymous with human genius. Archimedes' treatises, which laid the foundations of mechanics, mathematics, and physics, were among the greatest achievements of the ancient world. However, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, they faced the threat of disappearance. Complex historical processes and the decline of scientific thought in Europe nearly erased the accomplishments of ancient scholars from memory for several centuries. Despite this, Archimedes' works survived thanks to the efforts of Byzantine and Arab scholars who played a crucial role in their translation, adaptation, and dissemination. After the destruction of many scientific centers in the Western Roman Empire, the writings of ancient authors, including Archimedes, were largely forgotten or lost in Europe. However, the Byzantine Empire endured, and knowledge was preserved in centers like the Library of Constantinople. Byzantine scholars not only copied but also commented on Archimedes' works, helping to maintain their significance for future generations. Yet, Byzantium alone might not have been enough for Archimedes' knowledge to endure the ages. A decisive contribution to the preservation of his works came from Arab scholars. Starting in the 7th century, during the Islamic Golden Age, the Arab world became a major center of science and culture. Caliphs of the Abbasid dynasty, such as Al-Mamun, sponsored the translation of ancient Greek and Syriac texts into Arabic. Baghdad's House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah, became a leading scientific institution where the works of Archimedes were collected, alongside those of Euclid, Aristotle, and others. Arab scholars like al-Kindi and Ibn al-Haytham al-Hazan not only translated his writings but also built upon them. For example, al-Hazan, having studied Archimedes' research on hydrostatics, wrote his own treatises detailing the principles of floating bodies. These translations were often accompanied by commentaries that explained complex aspects of the ancient texts, making them accessible to a wider audience. These Arabic translations became the crucial bridge through which Archimedes' knowledge passed from antiquity into the Middle Ages, eventually reaching Europe. By the 10th, 12th centuries, Europe began to experience a revival of learning. Scientific works translated by Arab scholars started flowing back to the West, primarily through Spain and Sicily, which were then centers of cultural exchange between the Christian and Muslim worlds. Latin translators, such as Gerard of Cremona, translated Archimedes' works from Arabic into Latin, reintroducing them into European universities. During this period, Archimedes' writings became foundational for the study of mathematics and mechanics. His works inspired scholars like Leonardo Fibonacci, who applied Archimedean methods in his mathematical research, and Roger Bacon, who was interested in his experimental approaches. Archimedes' works were especially valued during the Renaissance, when European scholars began to seek out Greek originals directly. Copies of Greek texts preserved in Byzantium played a vital role in this process. For instance, Archimedes' work, The Method of Mechanical Theorems, containing his groundbreaking insights related to integral calculus, was only rediscovered in 1906 as a palimpsest, a manuscript page from which the text has been scraped or washed off so that the page can be reused. However, even during the Middle Ages, his ideas on hydrostatics were actively studied. Archimedes' works became an integral part of the formation of scientific thought in Europe. His discoveries in mechanics inspired not only medieval scholars, but also the great minds of the scientific revolution, such as Galileo and Newton. Galileo highly regarded the principles of levers and hydrostatics developed by Archimedes, while Newton utilized his methods when formulating his laws of motion. The story of the preservation of Archimedes' works is a powerful example of how knowledge can be transmitted across civilizations and epochs. Arab scholars, acting as custodians of ancient wisdom, and European translators who brought this wisdom back to the West, demonstrated how science can connect entire eras and cultures.